The old adage goes, you are what you eat. It makes us who we are from the inside out. Not so many years ago, people ate food that they grew from their garden or bought from their local farmer. Nutrients that fuel our bodies are housed in those foods. Can we maintain health with good nutrition alone? Which supplements are the best to take and why? Bev will attempt to clarify these issues in her audio-visual presentation entitled Whole Food Nutrition. All supplements are not created equally.
This next presentation, we're going to be talking about whole food nutrition, and it's really a very big topic, but what I wanted to talk about today was the fact that not all supplements are created equally. And I thought it'd be useful for people to have a sense when they go into their health food stores how to critically assess which supplements that they should take and which ones they shouldn't. So first, let's start off by talking about whether we actually need to supplement or not. Because really, for the longest time, from a holistic point of view, I've always thought, well, if you're eating the right diet, you really shouldn't need to supplement. I mean, if you're taking in the right foods, then our body is designed to be able to absorb, utilize those nutrients, and then be able to excrete the ones that it doesn't need. So how do we know when we need to take supplements? It was an interesting study that I found from the US where they took 120 people and they were all eating foods that were considered a good whole food diet. They were going by the recommended daily allowances for all the nutrients that they needed. It was a very closely monitored study. And they found at the end that 12% of the people had normal blood levels for vitamins. Only 12 of them. But 88% were deficient. 61% of these people, as I said, were having a normal North American diet and the recommended diet. So really, when you look at it from that point of view, is that there may be problems in absorption with these people, but generally, it seems that we need to take on some kind of supplement regime to be able to let ourselves get the nutrients that it needs. So we're not in starvation mode in our society, because if you look at general weights have been going up and up and up. But I think the problem is that we're really eating nutrient deficient foods generally, and maybe even our recommended daily allowances are not appropriate to be able to give us what we need for our overall health. And after all, we are what we eat, so we want to make sure that what we're eating is really good. The other point about this is that our soil has become a lot more deficient in nutrients as it was before. It used to be very common for farmers to rotate crops to keep the nutrients in the soil, and those types of practices have gone by the wayside because of commercialization of farming and the problems with making a really good living farming. And so I think generally our soil nutrients, the richness of our soil over time has been depleted as well. So where it may have been possible a couple generations ago to be able to just eat good foods to maintain your health, I think now at least a minimum of good supplementation is necessary when you are in good health. And then if you have a disease state or you're struggling with imbalance in your body, there's a case for having supplementation for a period of time until you start to get back into more optimum health again. So which form of supplements are best? Well, really, humans, the way we're designed, we've been intended to get food or nutrients from food sources. So it would make sense that our body is set up from a chemical point of view to be able to absorb and utilize nutrients when they're in their whole food form. Having the things in the food, and we'll talk about what they are in a minute, but the things that are in foods is critical for the body to be able to use the nutrient the way it needs to. It's not just sort of there by default, but there is a need for these other things other than, say, the vitamin or the mineral that you need that helps to make you utilize it better. What's really great is that food is complete with vitamins, minerals, trace element activators, enzymes, coenzymes, antioxidants, amino acids, and fatty acids, those essential fatty acids, that all function together to create an equilibrium. All this complicated chemistry is going on just by us, say, putting a blueberry into our mouth. We're getting great antioxidants, we're getting vitamin C, we're getting lots of different nutrients that our body needs, and all we have to do is take it in and absorb it. So as far as the isolates go, I don't know if you've ever taken a close look at the bottle of most supplements that are out there, but when you look on the back of it, it says always take your nutrients with food, your supplements with food. And the reason for that is that the manufacturers know that if you take an isolated nutrient, it's going to be better absorbed if you take it with food, because foods will aid the absorption of isolated vitamins. And we've always focused on absorption. Like if I give calcium as an example. Years ago, calcium carbonate was the only calcium out there, and people just took calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is often made out of shells, and it's not very well absorbed. It's like taking limestone. It's like eating limestone. It's not very well absorbed into your system. And then the manufacturers got smart. They thought, okay, well, let's try and improve this absorption. And they started adding other ones that were better absorbed, like calcium gluconate or calcium lactate or calcium citrate. Okay? And so then all these different forms of calcium came out that they said, yeah, these are better absorbed. That means that what you take in to your system is then going to be absorbed to your bloodstream. Okay, so it's getting that far across the mucous membranes into the bloodstream. Now the trick with that is what a lot of manufacturers did was that they would use the inexpensive calcium carbonate as the majority of the calcium in that supplement, and then they put a little bit of the more expensive lactates and gluconates and citrates in to make it look like a well-rounded supplement. But what was really happening there was that the absorption is only as fast as the slowest absorber. So it's that rate determining step. So that meant that carbonate was slowing down the absorption of all the other ones that were in there. So now what you're buying is really an expensive version of calcium carbonate. So we focused on absorption. Absorption was the key. But really, the key to any food being processed properly and becoming meaningful in our body is utilization. What I mean by utilization of food is that once it gets into the bloodstream, it also needs to get from the bloodstream through the receptors into the tissue, into the actual cell. Okay? So the end absorption is not the end of the story. What it has to do is go from the bloodstream, be latched onto the receptors, and then get in to the system, into the cell. It's like if you put a letter into the mailbox without having a postal code. It'll have the person's name on it, and it might sort of float around for a while, but without the postal code, that letter really does not know where to go. And that's the same with absorption and utilization. So let's look at the history of how we started to fractionate our whole foods. How did we get this reductionist idea of taking one vitamin and isolating it into a capsule for people to take? What's really interesting to me when I did this research is that in 1937, there was a guy named Szent Gorki, and I know I'm saying it wrong, but he's a Hungarian scientist who won the Nobel Prize for curing scurvy. And what he cured scurvy with, if you ask anybody, they'll say vitamin C. But in actual fact, vitamin C had not been isolated yet. So what he used was a concentrate from red peppers. Okay? He took this concentrate and he gave it to people with scurvy, and 100% of them were cured. So in 1937, he actually won the Nobel Prize for this. Very impressive. Now, once vitamin C had been isolated, he went back and he repeated those experiments. And he took a population of people with scurvy and used vitamin C instead of red pepper concentrate to try and reverse the effects of scurvy. And what he found was that only 1/10 of the population that received vitamin C was cured of scurvy versus the red pepper concentrate people. What it would tell me from there is that the whole story, we didn't know the whole story. Why was there this difference between vitamin C and red pepper concentrate? Okay. Now you have to understand that this was the beginning, 1900s were the beginning of the pharmaceutical movement. So all pharmacists and science was focused on isolating nutrients, finding out why they were used, and making isolated molecules, which then became the pharmaceutical industry. Because for years, what we had was natural medicines. So doctors used herbs, pharmacists dispensed herbs. It was very much, this plant does this and that plant does this, but there wasn't any knowledge of which constituents were doing what. So there was a real movement of, this is the new science that's going to give us more information that we need to look into. And this is how this reductionist idea, pharmaceutical world, was born. And even back in the 1920s, Casimir Funk, who discovered thiamine, which is a B vitamin, said that synthetic vitamins are highly inferior to vitamins from natural sources. That was in the 1920s. We figured that out. But that somehow got lost in the marketing message that we've received since then. Now, whole foods contain all the nutrients that you need to absorb that vitamin. And what's even further more interesting about that case is that metabolites from plants become our foods. In fact, the waste products of plants at stress become the vitamins that we need. And I find that really poetic, because now we know that we are just in the chain and the foods are part of what we become, and then we eventually go back to the earth and the cycle continues. But USP vitamins and minerals, that's United Standard Pharmacopoeia is what USP stands for. And most of the brands that are out there in the health food stores today are USP vitamins. That means they're isolated nutrients. These vitamins and minerals may be absorbed over the digestive tract, but then once they're in the bloodstream, they have to find the needed nutrients and cofactors to be able to be utilized in the cell in the appropriate way. It's like they don't have the postal code and they've got to find it before they can get into that cell. Ultimately, what happens is that isolates can deplete the body of the essential nutrients that it needs. For example, scientific research has shown that an excess of vitamins can produce the same symptoms as deficiency. And the most research that's been done is B vitamins. So now let me give you an example. And it's a little bit scary, and it's a little bit convoluted. So I'll just go through it step by step. The pH of your stomach is about 2 to 2.3. It's pretty acidic. Now the pH of calcium is about 7.5 to 7.8. So it's very basic. If you remember your pH, that lower pHs is acidic and higher pHs is basic. So, and 7 is about neutral. Now, the threshold of which calcium can be absorbed is 100 milligrams. So at any one given time, the mucous membranes of the digestive tract can only absorb 100 milligrams of calcium, elemental calcium. Okay? Most supplements out there, isolated nutrients, will be absorbed about 1 to 3%. So let's say if you've got 1,000 milligrams of calcium, you're probably only getting about 10 milligrams of the actual elemental calcium making it into the bloodstream. Okay? So, but the mucous membrane can accept, if it's absorbable, about 100 milligrams of calcium. So now if you take, let's say you take 500 milligrams twice a day of calcium, what happens then is you get 400 milligrams of this calcium sitting around in your digestive tract. What happens from there is that increases the pH of your stomach. So now if the pH is increased, the stomach starts producing more acid. So now the acid makes the stomach too acidic. So then the body releases calcitonin from the parathyroid, which is behind your thyroid, and it's in control of calcium balance in the body. It sends the hormone parathyroid looking for calcium. And where do you think the best source of calcium is in your body? It's your bones. right? So now bone is being broken down to be able to normalize pH in the stomach. So by supplementing with poor absorbable high dose calciums, we can actually be causing bone loss in our bones. Okay, that's an example. As I said, very convoluted, but also very scary. And it's actually interesting to note that in North America, we have the highest recommended dosage for calcium supplementation of anywhere else in the world. And we also have the highest rates of osteoporosis in anywhere else in the world. So there's a lot of factors, but this calcium supplementation is a key part of it, I think. So when we look at whole foods versus isolates, they have shown that diets high in vitamin C content from fruits and vegetables are associated with a lower risk of all kinds of conditions, especially cancers of the oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, and colon, and the lung. But in contrast, consumption of isolated vitamin C as a supplement, ascorbic acid, in trials had no effect on the development of colorectal cancers or stomach cancers. So there's a very different story about vitamin C as a whole food versus vitamin C as an isolated nutrient. Okay? So, and those are both scientific studies that are showing this, several of them. And many of these studies are in journals like the New England Journal of Medicine and very well recommended journals in the medical field. So as I was mentioning about absorption versus utilization, we focused on this absorption capability. It's kind of a marketing tool that a lot of the manufacturers use, that, oh, this is a lot more absorbable than that one, okay? But really, when you look at absorption, even at the best, isolated nutrients are about 5% absorbed if you take the best case scenario. But absorption, as I mentioned, is not the whole story, that this utilization is very, very important. So how do we improve utilization? How do we improve the ability of nutrient to get into the cell? Well, we go back to the Human Genome Project. What it did was it tried to map the DNA sequence of the human in hopes that that would unlock all the answers to our existence, to our health problems. We would have a gene that could fix this problem and another gene that fixed that problem. What we found was that there weren't answers like that. That there are about 30 to 40,000 genes to make and repair a human being. That's only a couple more genes than a fruit fly or a worm or even a common weed. Now what they've taken up is this Human Proteome Project. And basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to map all the proteins that are produced. And this is where I think the picture is going to come in, is that the proteins are the answers. So genes are pretty simple. Human DNA is the same in each cell. Okay, there's 250 different types of cells in the body, and each cell makes 1,000 distinct proteins. And then each protein can actually be modified by addition of sugars and different things as it's needed. And then the needs for those proteins are constantly in flux. So it's quite a complicated picture. Proteins are made of 20 different amino acids usually, and they're three-dimensional. So they form sort of a structure. Now, proteins are the things that transport our nutrients into the cell and allow for their entrance. Okay, so this is really the key. In fact, scientists now really believe that proteins actually perform most life functions in our body. Now, if we fast forward from the 30s when we were talking about vitamin C versus 1998, there is a scientist in 1999 named Dr. Günter Blobel who won the Nobel Prize for discovering this mechanism by which the proteins can actually guide the nutrients into the cell. Only whole foods will contain these chaperones, which are like enzymes or ligands that can actually help transport the nutrient into the cell. So if we take an example of a whole food versus an isolate of vitamin C, There's pure ascorbic acid, okay, which is usually calcium ascorbate. And it's usually made from corn syrup or refined sugar. It doesn't contain any protein cofactors or any life force, really. It drains the body of nutrients and it fuels deficiency. How many people out there are taking, thousands of milligrams of vitamin C because it's good for them? Now, if you take whole food vitamin C, it's usually a concentrate of orange extract, of citrus bioflavonoids. It's biologically active. It provides a unified network of the vital food constituents, and it promotes optimum health. And let me just show you what it sort of looks like. This is a whole food vitamin C complex. So the ascorbic acid is sort of on the outside, and this is all sort of lined with protein ligands and whatnot. But then you have ascorbigen bioflavonoid complexes. You have tyrosinase, which is an enzyme. And then they have these other factors. They really haven't kind of figured out exactly what they are, but they're proteins. There's a P, K, and J factor. If you think about how long vitamin C's been around, that just the science that I'm showing you here is very at the cutting edge. People are just learning about what these factors actually do. But it's very key to how our body utilizes nutrients at the cellular level. So vitamin C is a simple one, but when we get into some of the other nutrients that aren't absorbed as well, it becomes a much bigger area of research that is going on today. But suffice to say that with whole food nutrients, the vitamin is actually absorbed readily, and then it's utilized by the cell readily. So instead of all this excess nutrient sitting around waiting for utilization, not being able to find the cell and causing detrimental effects on the body, if we use small, much smaller amounts of the whole food supplements, we can keep our bodies healthy and not cause deficiency. So what I like to do as far as my philosophy around using supplements is use foods to keep the body healthy. In conditions where it need extra help, we're going to use whole food supplements that will act in a different way at small doses so the body will be able to absorb and utilize and bring itself back into health. The great thing about whole foods is that it does provide all the nutrients that are needed in the body. And this category of whole foods that I'm talking about are things like fresh foods. So eating your fresh produce. We talk about what you see in the health food stores as far as herbs and even vitamins go. Well, we know that these USP vitamins are not even remotely made from any plant that we've ever known. But certainly as far as dried herbs go, I think intuitively we would just say fresh is always best. Like I ask people, do you go to your produce section or do you go to the frozen food section? And I think we intuitively know that eating fresh is best. So how we have medicalized and disconnected from the idea of our vitamins being like medicines rather than foods is really perplexing. I think we really need to reconnect with the wisdom that we have about using foods in their whole form as possible. So let's look at the use of herbal medicine as whole foods. When herbs are dried, they're oxidized and they're changed as well. And again, most of them out there in the health food stores are capsules, tablets, teas. And even when they're dried, you're really taking a lot of the cofactors and the action out of the herbs. So really, for the maximum efficacy, I recommend the use of fresh plant juices when you can use them, because that is really the best way to take on herbs. Now, with whole food nutrition, as far as supplementation goes, generally, what we want to do is provide the body with nutrients, but in a form that's going to be absorbed. And the reality of our life is that we don't always have the luxury to eat all the nutrients that we need. And I think I illustrated at the beginning that even if we do have a good diet, often we're becoming deficient. So there are some companies out there that do truly make whole food supplements. And it's very key to be using these to try and improve your health. Vitamins and minerals as whole foods are needed for proper absorption and utilization, as I mentioned. And isolates simply don't provide that same option, and they can actually make your body more deficient. So what I try to do, because these other forms can be detrimental, is I try to use just very select few supplements and use them in a whole food form. So I hope that's really given you a little bit of insight as to what's going on with whole foods and supplements, and that they're not all created equally. And I thank you very much for your time.